Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I think that this Liberal leadership campaign and the upcoming federal election that undoubtedly will follow it gives our country an opportunity to rethink a bunch of strategies and have a national conversation that I think is desperately needed. Because I do think that our country has not been on the completely right path for the last couple of years, and I think that the threat of Donald Trump and tariffs is another incentive for us to have that national conversation. I think number one, we need to have a focus on prosperity and productivity that we just have not had. And I think we need to do a couple of things in that regard. The first thing is I do think we need a national housing strategy. Housing is unaffordable for the vast majority of Canadians. It takes, an income level the vast majority of Canadians don't have to afford a home in the major cities in Canada today. Over $175,000 median income in most of Canada, and over 200 and something thousand dollars in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. It takes 15 to 20 years for people to save the required down payment. That's not the kind of economic situation that we can allow to continue, because the vast majority of Canadians, particularly young Canadians or newcomers or renters that want to get into homeownership, can never dream of affording that, let alone actually achieving that. And so we need a national housing strategy, and that's got to be based on a couple of things. Number one, it's got to be dramatically reducing the red tape and regulations associated with getting housing approved. Number two, it's reducing development fees, if not eliminating them. The United States finances the kind of growth through different types of systems, municipal tax bonds. Other jurisdictions in the world fund it through general tax revenue. We, for some reason, have done it primarily through development fees, and I think that has proven to be a huge mistake. 31% of housing prices being taxes to the federal and provincial municipal governments doesn't make sense. It's not sustainable. That tax is about comparable to what homes would have cost 20 years ago, and to certainly what down payments are today. We need to improve our housing system. We need to make housing affordable. Again, we need to make our housing as a ratio to personal disposable income comparable to what it is elsewhere in the world. Otherwise, we're not competitive, and people are going to move to smaller towns in Canada and or to the United States and elsewhere because of housing affordability issues. Just look at what it would cost to buy a home in Upper New York State rather than Southern Ontario, and you'll see how much more competitive it is in other jurisdictions. So, national housing strategy, number one. Number two is a national infrastructure strategy, and I think this is something that we need to do for Canada, but it's also something we need to do to combat the threat of Donald Trump's tariff. And I think, you go back to 1867 and the threat of American annexation of Western Canada. What did John A. Macdonald do? He put in a national infrastructure plan, which was primarily building a railway to tie Canada together east to west. Railways are one thing, but I think pipelines are needed today, and potentially an electrical grid system, and I think that and it may be fast rail between Quebec and Windsor, so maybe not right across the country, but to tie us economically together in a way that we haven't been, frankly, in the last couple of years, because we've been focused too much on north-south trade rather than east-west. So, pipelines. I think we need to get our natural resources to different markets than being reliant on the United States. And that means that we've got to accelerate approvals of pipelines, at least to the West Coast. And frankly, I think also to Central Canada, if not to the East Coast. And I'm not suggesting that we completely override environmental concerns and regulations, but I think that they have been studied to death. I think some of the Indigenous groups that at some point in time in the past have been opposed to those pipelines today are more supportive, particularly because they are involved in the capital stack and making equity contributions and getting jobs and economic development out of those opportunities. I think some of the provincial jurisdictions that have been opposed to the pipelines need to rethink whether they make economic sense, particularly if we're going to be reliant on energy or power from the United States if we don't create our own pipeline solutions. And so this is a national security issue. It's a combat Trump tariff issue. It's an economic infrastructure investment issue. It's a jobs issue. And it is it's the right thing to do to tie Canada together in a way that we haven't really done since the Trans-Canada Highway and the building of the railways. And we need to think about the ways that we do that in today's environment. I think number three is trade. And that's got two components to it. Number one is that we need to have interprovincial trade barriers dramatically reduced, if not, frankly, completely eliminated. How can we be arguing for the benefits of free trade between Canada and the United States if we don't have free trade in Canada? And it's not just trade; it's regulation. It is the restrictions of certification that we put on lawyers and plumbers and electricians and doctors and nurses and we should have free movement of labor and capital and trade amongst Canada. Why can't we buy wine in BC and ship it to Ontario? The interprovincial trade barriers just don't make logical sense, particularly in a world where we're arguing that we need to honor our trade agreements with the United States and want free trade there. Number two, in trade, we've got to develop diversification of our trade relations with other countries in Europe and particularly in Asia that we've been talking about for 50 years since Pierre Trudeau talked about us diversifying our trade, and we haven't done it, and we need to do it. And I think that is, based on obviously freer trade. It's based on infrastructure at our ports. At our airports, because a lot of that trade now is shipped by air freight, and it is with the Canadian government helping Canadian companies trade. I think one of the reasons why, the reality of geography is such a reality is that common language, common legal system, common rules, and it's just across the border means that there's been this natural gravitational pull to the United States. We need to combat that. And the way to combat that is by making it easier for people to trade with countries that may not speak English, that may not have common laws, regulations, rules, and Export Development Canada and government trade offices, I think, can help dramatically in that regard. And then on trade, clearly we need to have a strategy in regards to dealing with Trump, and I think that is a One Canada strategy. I think it is a reciprocal combat of his threats. I think that's the only thing he respects. And yet at the same time, I think it is addressing some of the concerns that are justifiable that he has raised. And so let me talk about that in number four, which I think is military expenditures. I think the fact that we've been a member of NATO and we haven't kept up with our 2% of GDP commitment for, what is it, more than a decade, and that we think it's going to be half a decade or longer before we actually get to 2% GDP, I think is a national disgrace. And we should admit that it is. We argue about other people that other countries that don't honor their international obligations and think it's a tragedy. We take a look at Trump, getting out of the Paris Accords as terrible. Well, we've committed to spend 2% of our GDP on defense, and we haven't done it for a long, long time. And why? And we've heard criticism of, we don't have jets, we don't have frigates, we don't have helicopters, we don't have munitions, we don't have tanks, we don't have armored vehicles, we're not protecting the North, we're not honoring our obligations in regards to NORAD and defending Arctic sovereignty. We could go on. Now, that spending, just like it is in the United States, it should be beneficial to Canadian business. And so we shouldn't be just spending it, we should be spending it smartly. We should be spending it in a way that creates Canadian jobs in building the armaments and the vehicles and the military infrastructure that we need. And we should be helping Canadian business and Canadian people with that spending, and that's key. And I do think that Arctic sovereignty and defense is key in the future as we have global warming, as the Northwest Passage is going to become a important shipping route, as China and Russia start playing a far more important role, and frankly, even the United States in the Arctic, obviously Alaska, but now claiming Greenland as critically important to the United States security interests. The Arctic is important to us, and it's our Arctic. We should be defending it. We should be ensuring that we have the right people, military establishments, businesses, interests, etc., there that we need to have. I think that border security is key, and I don't think it's just this north-south issue that Donald Trump is concerned about. Obviously, it is a south-north. I think that there has been some migrants coming from Canada going to the United States, and we know that we've had a porous immigration system, and some of that has undoubtedly leaked into the United States, and we need to solve our immigration system, and I think the federal government is doing some of that, but we need to beef up our borders. But I'm worried about migrants coming from the United States to Canada, particularly as they're concerned about what Donald Trump is going to be doing regarding mass deportations and deportation camps, etc. And so we need to beef up the border security from that regard. And, he is worried about fentanyl coming from Canada into the United States. I'm worried about guns coming from the United States into Canada. And so for whatever the reasons are that you're concerned about leakage across the border, we need to beef that up. And that needs to be something that we are committed to. And if we have ever any dream of going back to the borders that we had in the past and the freer movement of goods and services and people across the Canadian-U.S. border, we need to do a better job of policing our international borders. And Trump's claims that people are bringing things in by plane to Canada and then shipping it into the United States. I don't know how true it is, but I hear lots of comments that there is some truth in that, and we need to make sure that our international borders are secure from trade, from goods, from people, etc. And I think that that's key. And so, therefore, while we need to combat Trump's threatened tariffs, if there is any truth to some of his allegations about border security, we need to be mindful of that, and we need to address it, and we need to address it quick. I think then the next issue that we need to address is our lack of focus on productivity and prosperity, a growth agenda, rather than redistribution. And I think that that has been a failure of the federal government over the course of the last government. And I think we had a very prosperous situation in Canada, and maybe we were too focused on climate change. We were too focused on environment. We were too focused on healthcare and pharmacare and things that were demanded of us, demanded of the Liberal government from the NDP, etc. And we squandered some of the prosperity that we had, or we didn't pay enough attention to it, and we've allowed ourselves to have a decade or so of no growth in real income. I think you've got to focus on the economy first, grow the pie first, and then you can think about redistributing. And I do think that one of the strengths of the Canadian economic system has been that we have been more generous through our healthcare system, through our pension care system, et cetera. And I think we need to continue to do that in the future, but we need to grow the pie first. And I think that that's key. And so I think having business people, economic people involved in the Canadian cabinet, if not in the role of prime ministership, I think focusing on how we increase productivity, how we therefore become more prosperous, how we grow our median incomes, I think levels of employment, and I think that comes from some of the industrial strategy, frankly, that Biden has introduced in the United States. I think that our debt to GDP at less than 2% of GDP versus the Americans is 6% of GDP says that we've got some money that we can spend, and we shouldn't be spending it just on transfers. We should be spending it on things like infrastructure, like the CHIPS Act in the United States, like things that we can do to promote economic growth in Canada. Promote research and development, promote manufacturing in Canada. We need to have a little bit more of this nationalistic economic orientation that the United States has, not just being reliant on buying the cheapest goods from wherever. We do want some of those goods to be produced in Canada. We should be demanding that, and we can incentivize that. I think the last thing I want to focus on is that we need to rebuild our Canadian identity. I think we've lost some of that. And I think that, I'm Joe from Canada speech is a wonderful speech, but it's too much about why we're not American. I think it's got to be why we're proud to be Canadian. And I do think our healthcare system, our educational system, I think our acceptance of diversity, I think our natural beauty, our natural resources, our history, where we haven't had the racism, we haven't had some of the civil war and the civil unrest that other places have had, not just the United States, but other places. I think we can be proud, more proud, very proud of the role Canada's played in the world. I think that those people that have said Canada, the world needs more Canada, are right. But we've lost some of that identity, that pride of who we are, and why we're different, and why we're a great place to live, to work, to raise a family. And I've just flown across the country. I've seen the natural beauty that we've got, the expanse of the prairies and the beauty of the mountains, the Rockies and the coastal mountains. I've spent a couple of days skiing at Whistler, and seeing the friendliness of the staff, the welcoming of people from Europe and Australia and Mexico, etc. The people that feel comfortable coming from around the world to Canada to enjoy our natural beauty. We've got a special place. Maybe we don't travel across the country often enough. Maybe we don't meet people. In a reception yesterday, I was meeting people from northern Saskatchewan, from northern Alberta, from Quebec, from Toronto, from BC, and we've got to realize the strength and the beauty, the intelligence, the friendliness of Canadians. We are a unique people. We're wonderful people. We've got a wonderful country. We need to refine that Canadian identity, that Canadian spirit, that Canadian pride. And I think that that's key for the next Prime Minister to ensure that they instill and excite us all about that opportunity to be proud of being Canadian again. So, national infrastructure strategy, national trade strategy, energy strategy, defense strategy, productivity strategy, and national Canadian spirit. Those are the things I would do if I was running for Liberal leadership or the Prime Ministership of Canada. I look forward to this debate that will continue during the leadership campaign and continue into the election campaign, because I think it's going to give all of us an opportunity to think about what Canada we want and who we want to be governing us. Thanks. Good night. I remind you I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock at 9:60 a.m. You can stream me online at saga960am.ca, and all my podcasts and videos go up on my website, briancrombie.com, on social media, on my YouTube channel, Brian Crombie, and on lots of podcast servers, Apple, Audible, Speakeasy, SoundCloud, etc. Good night, everybody. And let's reinvent Canada. Let's rethink Canada. Good night.